Okay, so don't want to get anybody overexcited at the beginning of the sermon, but don't know if you noticed, it is Christmas Day tomorrow. And I'm sure you've been reminded of that by especially if you have little people in your house or big people with beards. It's pretty exciting, isn't it? It's pretty exciting. Some of us might go to sleep tonight thinking about what we might get tomorrow. Maybe that's on our mind. Maybe there's a particular present that we're hoping for, or maybe something we've asked for. For some of us, the excitement tomorrow might not be so much about what we might get, but rather seeing other people open a special gift. And for others of us, all we really want is for tomorrow to go well, for people to be happy, thankful, satisfied, for the food to come out right, and for family to get on. We've all got our Christmas wishes, haven't we? But what is it we really want? What do we really desire? Because there are things that we want that we just couldn't put on our Christmas wish list. Serious things, important things. We want our child to be well. We desire our illness to be taken away. We want our bodies to be made whole. We desire a faithful spouse, someone to love and to help us with life. We desire a calm home, well-behaved children, and a functional family life. We desire escape from abuse, hardship, and bullying. We desire to be free from our bad choices and self-destructive habits. We desire peace, wholeness, happiness, and joy. But who could possibly bring us that? Not Santa, not Mum and Dad. There is no wish list we could put those things on and hope to find those things under our tree on Christmas morning. So how can we ever be satisfied? Can we ever know what it's like to have our deepest desires met? Or are we just doomed to be sad, lonely, to have a life full of longing and dissatisfaction? Wonderfully, no. Because as the carol says, Jesus is the desire of nations. Our deepest desires are met in Jesus. He, whether we realize it or not, Jesus is our deepest desire. So, let us finish this time of Advent, this time of waiting, with the desire of nations. So the place the carol writers, and if you remember the original writers of this carol were not the carol writers, but the monastics, the monks who first put these prayers together, the place they get this title from, we read it earlier on, is Haggai chapter 2, verse 7. And I always think, poor Haggai, he really only gets wheeled out at Christmas, doesn't he? And I was thinking, maybe that's our sign to preach through Haggai this year. Maybe we'll do that. But Haggai is a very short minor prophet. Poor Haggai, he's not even a major prophet. He's a minor prophet. It's only 2 chapters long, right at the end of the New Testament. And in fact, we read basically a quarter of the whole letter this morning, the whole prophecy. And we read those 9 verses, and we read in verse 7, "And I will shake all nations, so that the treasure of all nations shall come in. And I will fill this house with glory, says the Lord of hosts." And it's that word that's translated treasure there. Treasure isn't a bad translation, and it is very accurate for the immediate context in which it was written, but it flattens out the meaning and loses some of its kind of prophetic impact. Because when we hear treasure, we think what follows in the next verse: gold and silver, precious stones. And this word can be used for those things, but it also has a broader scope. So another translation puts it this way: the choice things of all the nations. Or another, the desire of all the nations will come in. Simply, Haggai is saying there is coming a time when what is precious to the nations, what is precious to the people of the world, that will come in and fill God's temple. So what is Haggai talking about? What is this desire of nations? Well, there are kind of three meanings, three interpretations, and they're all right, they're all true, but only one of them is the ultimate fulfillment of Haggai's words. So let's look at it first at the immediate context. What is happening around Haggai that causes him to say this? Well, very long story short, Israel, the church, has been in exile. They disobeyed God, they were taken out of the land, they were in exile. But now God has brought them back with the specific task of rebuilding the temple. And so they're doing this, and it's going really slowly. And God speaks through Haggai, and our reading tells us that he speaks to them in the 7th month, on the 21st day of the month. That's when the word of the Lord came. Why does Haggai record the day of the message? Well, because this day is the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles. We sometimes call it the Feast of Booths. During the Feast of Tabernacles, the church, Israel, will leave their relatively comfortable homes and they'd go out and they'd live in tents for 9 days. And this was to remind us of our time in the wilderness and to remind us that this world is temporary. We're not living for this world, and so we shouldn't get too attached. We should see ourselves as kind of living in tents, nomads in this world. We're living for the kingdom to come. And so God sends this message at this time because this is when they needed it. They are being reminded that just as they are living in a tent and not in their final thing, so the temple is still a tent compared to the final kingdom which is to come. And we read in Ezra, which is also written around this time, that when the foundation of the temple had been laid, there was actually great rejoicing in Israel. All the young people rejoiced at the foundation of the temple being built, because these young people, they'd been born in captivity, they'd been born in exile, they'd never seen the temple before it had been knocked down, before they'd gone into exile. And so they were like, this is amazing, look, it's only very basic, but here's the temple, there's foundations and there's an altar. They'd never worshipped with an altar before, they're excited. But the older people remembered how large and magnificent Solomon's temple had been in its heyday. And so when they saw the now pitiful foundations of the new temple, they couldn't help but weep in disappointment. They longed for the magnificent temple of the past. And so God assures them, he says, I will shake the nations, so that the treasures of all the nations shall come in, and I will fill this house with glory. And he goes on to say in verse 8, look, all the silver is mine, all the gold is mine, it all belongs to me already. Like, I could bring it in a snap if I wanted to. There's no need for tons of gold and silver to be in this temple. That's not really what I'm aiming at. The Lord is saying, keep the big picture in mind, people. The glory of my temple is not in the past. The fullness of my temple is yet to come. Solomon's temple, as glorious as it was not my temple's final form. I could bring every ounce of gold in here right now if I wanted, but that is not the thing that's going to make my temple beautiful and full of glory. God is comforting them. He's refocusing them. And he does this by saying, verse 7, there will be a day when I will shake the nations, the world will be shaken, and I will bring into the temple all the treasures, all the treasure of the nations, the desire of the nations. Then, on that day, only then will you see how glorious my temple really is. So, that's the immediate context. That's the first meaning. You know, God will bring in the gold when he wants to. He will bring in the treasure when he wants to. We don't really understand what his treasure is until we see it. But is gold, is that really the treasure that God wants to furnish his temple with? Well, no, not ultimately, it's not. And so another interpretation is that the treasure of the nations is the nations. That's another idea here. So that the treasure of the nations means that the nations are the treasures. The people are the treasures of the nations. And so we could understand the Lord to be saying, the real treasure that I will build my temple with is people. And not just Israelites, but the people from every tribe, every tongue, and every nation. People like you and me. The reference to shaking in the Bible is usually linked to God's judgment. So we could understand the Lord to be saying, on the great day of judgment, when everything is shaken, where everything is shown to be fragile and temporary and passing, then I will bring my people into my temple to be with me. And that is certainly true, isn't it? That's absolutely true. And we see that prophesied in other places in the Bible as well. Could Haggai be meaning that? Possibly. Or is there a greater treasure than even the nations themselves that will come into the temple? I will shake all the nations, so the desire of all nations shall come in and fill my house with glory. Haggai is speaking of Jesus. He's speaking of Jesus. Let me read this to you. Luke 2, 21 to 24. And at the end of 8 days, when the baby was circumcised, Jesus, he was called Jesus, the name given by the angel before he was conceived in the womb. And when the time came for their purification, according to the law of Moses, they, Mary and Joseph, brought him up to the temple in Jerusalem to present him to the Lord and offer a sacrifice according to what is said in the law of the Lord. This prophecy is fulfilled when Mary and Joseph bring Jesus, the desire of nations, into the temple when he's but 40 days old, a little baby. The law of Moses called for all newborn sons to be circumcised on the 8th day and then presented at the temple on the 40th day. It was the way that parents brought their children to God and made them part of his family, part of his church. The temple was the place where God was always present. In this physical space, the spiritual was made manifest. God sat on his throne to receive their sacrifices and hear their prayers, promising them that they could always find him here. And so parents brought their newborns to this point of contact with God, to this sacred place where the divine and the human meet, so that they may be received by God. And so Joseph and Mary arrived at the temple with their newborn son, like so many other parents before them. But this was different, because they brought the child who in himself already united the divine and the human. He didn't, in one sense, he did need to fulfill the law, but he didn't need to be brought to the temple. He was the temple. He says that later, doesn't he? He's talking about his body being the temple. They brought the child, who is himself the temple, to the place where God resides in his fullness. As Mary and Joseph carried him up the steps to the temple, unlike other parents, they had come to dedicate God to God. What a profound moment as the temple enters the temple, as the desire of nations comes in. God enters his own home, but incarnate. Here he has resided as promised in this holy place for many centuries. And yet now here he is, stood as he always had been with Moses in the tabernacle. But now he's stood, well, he's not stood, he's been carried because he's a tiny baby. But here he is stood in the flesh, in the same place he's always been. Jesus is the glory of God. He is the fulfillment of Haggai 2 verse 7. He is the glory of God, the that will fill the temple. Jesus is the one that the world truly desires. Jesus is the desire of nations. And we might ask, but is he though? Is he the desire of nations? Because it seems as though there's actually a lot of people who in fact don't desire Jesus. People who don't want to know him, don't want to follow him, don't want to know about him. I mean, it's not like churches up and down the country are kind of, full to overflowing, are they? Is Jesus really what the world desires? Let's return for a moment to that ultimate Christmas list. What is on it? Life, joy, peace. To be loved, to be well, to be healed, to be safe, to have order. Those are the things we truly desire, aren't they? And Jesus is the only one who can give us those things. Therefore, whether we acknowledge it or not, whenever we long for these things, it's actually Jesus we are longing for. Deep within each one of us, there is an echo of Eden, an ancestral memory of how life is meant to be. Within each of us, there is a remnant, even if it is very deep, and perhaps even suppressed, but there is a memory of Eden, of paradise, of those walks with Jesus in the garden, and it has left an imprint on us, and we want it back. We want that back. Every now and again we get a flashback. We are granted a glimpse of that life. Maybe it's at Christmas, the excitement and the genuine joy. Perhaps it's in the face of our children, that deep sense of love that we just can't describe. Perhaps it's those times when we're awake early and we see a sunrise, that quiet moment as we're able to take in creation, and there's that feeling within us that we're meant for something more, and we're experiencing a tiny shard of it. Sometimes we have these moments of true calm, love and joy, but they are so fleeting and they don't last, and we try and grab hold of them. We don't want it to pass. We never want them to leave, but when we grab at it, we find it's just like a mist. We can't get hold of it. We can't make the feelings stay, and then they're gone again. In that moment, what we have enjoyed, what has awoken that dormant memory of paradise within us, is an experience of Jesus. We have experienced something of him, of his goodness. And we want it. We want it so bad. And yet we then go elsewhere looking for it. But it is actually Jesus who we desire. He alone can fulfill those deep longings. And he has, if we just come to him and receive his life and his help. Jesus is the desire of all nations, whether the nations know him or not. He isn't the desire of some nations. He isn't just the answer to Christian nations. He is the desire of all nations, of all people. The nations desire him irrespective of whether they acknowledge him or not. He is the object of our deepest and highest longing. When he was born, it was proclaimed to the nations, to the world. His birth was literally written in the stars. And so wise men came from foreign lands to seek him out. Tyrants are threatened even by his infancy. Angels herald his arrival, and shepherds abandon their posts to see what has happened. From his birth, Jesus is shown to be the desire of all nations. And what about the rest of his life? Is there really any question, when we look at Jesus' life, is there any question of his desirability? Throughout his earthly ministry, crowds followed him. Everyone wanted to be near him, to receive what only he has to offer. They would climb trees to get a peek at him. They would crawl on the dirt just to touch the hem of his robe. They would even break through ceilings to be healed and touched by him. They would follow him out into the wilderness, far from food and civilization, just to hear him speak a little longer, because he's the one who speaks with authority. He does and says things that no one else has ever done or said. People are drawn to him as if by an invisible force, pulling them into him. Even his enemies are captivated with intrigue and they can't let it go. They can't stay away from him. But there are those, and there will always be those, who hate that Jesus is the one they desire. They cannot stand that Jesus is the one they want. They cannot tolerate the idea that they want or need him. Like Pharaoh, like the Pharisees, they are not even open to Jesus. For them, doing things their own way is so important that they would rather be miserable on their own terms than come under King Jesus, follow him, obey him, and find life. They've hardened their hearts towards Jesus. Please don't do this. Jesus is the only one who can meet your deepest needs and desires. Don't harden your hearts towards Jesus. As the psalmist says, today, if you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts. Jesus is the key of David. He is the only one who can open up heaven to you. He's the only one who can unlock your life and make sense of it. He's the only one who can explain your own heart and emotions to you. He is the one who's coming in resurrection to raise us back to life again and to heal us and to make our bodies whole. He is the one who's coming to defeat our enemies, freeing us from every harsh word and violent outburst. He is the one, the only one, who can give us our loved ones back, who can bring us back from the grave and free us from the devil. I promise you, Jesus is the one you desire. He is the one who can bring you true joy, happiness and satisfaction. He is the desire of nations. As we draw this to a close, let us just go back to that day when the desire of all nations came into the temple, the day when Jesus was carried in as a little baby. Because when that happens, he meets two people. He meets Simeon and he meets Anna. What can we learn from these two people? Simeon and Anna are both old. Like, one of them's really old. They're both holy, and they're both waiting for the desire of nations to come in. Luke 2:25-26 says, Now there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon, and this man was righteous and devout. And it had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not see death before he had seen the Lord's Christ. And he came in the Spirit into the temple, and when the parents, Mary and Joseph, brought in the child Jesus to do for him according to the custom of the law, Simeon took him up in his arms and blessed God. The story goes, we know a bit about Simeon from church history, and the story goes, Simeon was one of the 70 translators of the Old Testament into Greek. That version of the Bible we call the Septuagint. And while he was translating Isaiah 7:14, he saw the words in Hebrew, Behold, the unmarried woman will conceive. Now, this Hebrew word for woman can be translated as either virgin or young woman. And Simeon, as the story goes, began to write young woman. And suddenly an angel appeared to him and told him that virgin was the correct translation. Now, I cannot tell you how often I wish that would happen to me. No, not that one. That one. The angel told him what the correct translation was. It's virgin, and we're waiting for a virgin to come. And then the angel told him, Simeon, guess what? You're not going to die until you see this one who the virgin is going to bear until you see the Messiah. And so then Simeon waited. And he waited, and he waited. Now, we know the Septuagint was translated around the 3rd century BC. And so if this story of Simeon is correct, he waited a long time to see Jesus. Some traditions place Simeon at 360 years old when he finally held Christ in his arms. Such was his desire to wait for Jesus. My question for us is, are we ready to wait like Simeon? Jesus has promised that he will come to us. Jesus has promised he will come to us just as he promised he would come to Simeon. Are we ready for a lifetime of waiting on Jesus? Of looking for him? Do we truly desire Jesus so that whatever the world may bring to us, whatever treasures and pleasures it promises us and dangles in front of us, are we waiting for Jesus so much that when those things come, we're like, no, I don't need that. I don't want that. I want Jesus. He's the only one I'm waiting for. No, I don't want that. That's not going to help me. I want him. Do we have that singular focus, believing that at any moment Jesus could arrive? We must learn how to wait from Simeon. What about Anna? What must we learn from Anna? Well, we must learn to recognize Jesus' presence. Saint Anna was married as a young woman. She was only married for 7 years before she lost her husband. And so when her husband died, she began to live in the temple. She gave herself to work in the temple of the Lord, serving God with fasting and prayer. Now, if you're familiar with the story of Mary's birth to a different Anna and Joachim, and I know some of us are now, well, this Anna, who's been waiting in the temple for Jesus, was one of the women who looked after the Virgin Mary when she was dedicated to the temple as a young child. And so, Anna knew Mary. And she knew Mary's life. She knew her holiness. She knew her virginity. And so when Mary came to the temple with Jesus in her arms, Anna knew that this child was none other than the Messiah, God in the flesh, born of the Virgin, as Isaiah had prophesied and Simeon had correctly translated. She recognized the desire of nations being brought in because she recognized Mary, and she knew of her holiness and her virginity, her purity. And so let us be like Mary. Let it be that when people see us, they know that that must be Jesus. That it must be Jesus who is the one who is with us. Let us love people so completely that people want to be with us the way that they wanted to be with Jesus. Not because of us, but because they desire Jesus, and he's the one who we bring with us. We want to be like Simeon and Anna, desiring and waiting for Jesus. They gave their lives over to being at the temple so that they wouldn't miss him when he came. I'm sure there were those who said to them, just come away, come on, stop being weird, come and be normal, come and live a normal life. Why waste your life waiting for this baby? But they knew there was nothing better than waiting for this baby. They knew there was nothing better than waiting for Jesus. This Christmas, lots of things will compete for your heart and your affection. Presents, family, food, drink. You'll be told that Christmas is all about desiring these things. And if you don't have these things, what's the point? The Christmas is ruined. You'll be tempted to believe that you can just put Jesus aside for a little while and indulge your appetite, indulge your flesh, indulge your family. That those are the things that will really bring you joy and happiness. But it's not true. Don't miss Jesus coming into his temple. Don't miss the desire of nations coming in. Because we are the temple. The church is the temple. And Jesus is coming into us. That is what this whole Advent has been about, preparing ourselves, preparing our hearts to receive him. Well, now he has come. And so we don't want to fill his space with junk. We don't want to fill his space with things that won't satisfy. Lots of things will promise to fill you. Let me ask you, how is that working out for you so far? We fill our homes with stuff we don't need. We fill our stomachs with food that doesn't nourish. We fill our heads with entertainment that doesn't build up. But when Jesus comes into his temple, when he enters into your life, into your heart, and you let him in, he brings the life of heaven with him. The life of heaven is open and available to you. Tomorrow, whatever happens, whatever Christmas Day throws at you, whether good or bad, if you really want Jesus, he is here for you. He can help you and he can bring you joy. What do you want your Christmas Day to be filled with? As we come to the end of another year and contemplate a new one, what do you desire? Are we ready to learn the lessons of Anna and Simeon? Do we desire Jesus? Are we ready to wait on him? Are our eyes fixed on him and pushing away all the other lies of the world? Are we ready to receive him into the temple of our hearts, lives, and minds? In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.